Okay, so today I wanted to continue the talk that Peter actually began, talking about uh, the relative and the absolute mind. For example, uh, we have a saying that when one is ready, a teacher appears. And I think, for most of us, that seems like really fortunate, very convenient. And it would be great if that was all there was to it. Because when we're finally ready, when we're done all that we think we had to do in the rest of the world first, and then there comes our salvation, a teacher, and all we have to do is acknowledge it. But I'm sure that through most of our lives, we've already had many such opportunities and passed them by because for most of our lives, we already were full of things. We were too full of ourselves, and we weren't even ready to commit. And so we didn't even notice these enormous opportunities that showed up. The world was too interesting to us to stop. So when Peter talked about settling the self on the self last week, I wanted to continue this theme because it's really important for us. Because thinking of Suzuki Roshi's words, you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. This is a very strong advice to practice, not to give up practice, but to continue no matter what, because without it, we leave something totally undone. So we don't want to live our lives without reaching our full potential. And we really don't want to wither on the vine without first tasting what the flowering fruit of our lives means. So our relative limited self is all that we know in the beginning. And we identify with it completely. But it's the bare bones of a self. And we learn to navigate samsara with it before we understand much about it. And so we end up dressing up ourselves with concepts and ideas in a way that we think makes us look interesting or expresses who we are better. So we take ourselves, which was a bare bones self, as it were, just as we were, and we make it like dressing up an action figure or a Barbie doll, trying on all sorts of ideas about what makes us better or interesting. But we're still very uneasy because, unbeknownst to us, something else is driving the bus besides us. But without that unknown element, we would probably never budge from our positions of immature beliefs about reality. And basically, we'd stay unripe fruit for our whole lives. We're lucky because the unease that we feel takes away our self-assurance just enough to really try to understand the what and the why of our dilemma. Our true journey, our quest, begins with the first real questions from us. Why do I feel so unsatisfied? What can I do to make it better? What's wrong with this moment? We begin reading, for example, to understand. Some of us wander in restless moves from one thing to another and try to do a mixture of everything. Some of us go to teachers, some of us just look for answers wherever we can find them in any kind of reading in books. And some even try to outrun the problem because they're unable to rest even a small amount. But most of us just do a mixture of all of it. In spite of our efforts to avoid the baffling push from behind, this is a drive we don't understand. We still believe that if we try hard enough, we can make this life better. We can make samsara fit. But we don't know that samsara itself is a place of conflict, a challenge, a lesson, a place to face ourselves as we are. With sickness, old age, and death in our future, there's not much place to rest along the way. Samsara is not a place to settle down and live a life blessed without struggle. It is a place to find our true self, to free ourselves of rubbish of what limits us from maturing. We feel the push from the interior, a drive that we really don't understand, since we don't speak the language of Buddha. We thought we were chasing something called enlightenment, and it was difficult, but it was also exhilarating. The thought of great freedom pushed us on. But now we feel that we're being chased by something that's just mystifying and also alarming. We can't get away from it. In this state, we cannot rest. We're always on the alert for something threatening. We're always in a defense posture. But the good thing of this is that eventually that same alert state will change into a vigilant state of mind looking for major clues in practice. Now we've found in our lives the footprint of the ox, the first picture of the ox herding pictures. Now we know that enlightenment or freedom from suffering does indeed exist, and this state of mind will change to becoming very alert as we find the partially hidden ox as well, and the path to enlightenment as in the third practice of the ox herding pictures. But there are still 7 more of these ox herding pictures to go through. And these pictures show eventually the slow maturation of someone fully committed to practice and to full awakening. We want to escape samsara and make it to the marvelous place that we hear of called nirvana. But to find it, we only think to look in places that are sacred and holy. We're still hoping to find something outside ourselves, something that's perfect and worthy of our practice. So we study sutras and listen to teachers. We study histories and watch the experience of others. But what we find is that nirvana is already here and now, has always been here and now. We are perplexed because nirvana and samsara look exactly alike. The cup on the table of samsara is also the cup of nirvana. That doesn't make sense. Where is the freedom from suffering? But we're just told, keep on sitting, we'll figure it out eventually. We learn that suffering in samsara is a complication of self, too strong a focus on ourselves, the same activity as nirvana, but with the confusion of self. Nirvana is us residing as one whole being, as we are, without being divided into 2. Nirvana is a change of perspective. The world is the same, and yet it isn't. As we continue to sit, we come to understand that what we've been told is the truth, but cloaked like a child's fairy tale to help us begin to practice. Although we know we have to do the hard work ourselves, we still half believe that we can rely on the practice to see us through to the end. We believe that if we do it diligently, the practice will work for us. But the outside, we may wait for an eternity, and we may sit for an eternity, and we may chant and bow for an eternity, but the outside will not reward us with a magical happening. Even practice as we think of it can only go so far. We learn that we have to take the leap off the 100-foot pole into complete unknowing and find our way in the dark. Even teachers stop giving us fairy tales and start speaking of more serious things like, you have to give up everything. Even the practice as you think of it. You can't rely on anything. The practice too is like an empty boat. You must find your own ground in the present moment as you are. Now, unfortunately, the outside is closed to us as a means of escape, and we have to come back to ourselves even more than before. We know the Dharma is in us. We know the whole world is in us. We know every insight is in us, and everything we need to understand our quest is in us. but we resist because it suddenly feels very lonely. We don't know that loneliness is also a concept of fear and emotion. We have to practice longer to understand there is no loneliness, no not loneliness, but there is us, each a complete being, manifesting the world as we are, as much as we are capable to do. As we mature as a Buddha, our unripe self strives to understand our oneness as a whole being, without forgetting the great color we have as diversity. Then a magical happening may occur, but it won't be from the outside. An unanticipated fruit from our interior appears. The magical happening coming from the outside is not from the outside, but from within, in the guise of something magical or unexplainable, or else we would just pass it by. The mind can be very crafty. But in that teacher, we find someone we can finally talk to about all the things we've wondered about. We may wonder how it's possible in this whole world to meet someone who is in such accord with our spirit that we meet the appearance with complete acceptance. We give such a one open access to our interior without reserve. When one is ready, as it says, a teacher appears. We meet the real person in this other one, who is a real person, and the stereotype we imagined, although we do not realize that at once, this is still ourself. It's not as we expected it to happen. We're assured that the self was the real person. We've always assumed that's so. But now we find out that not only is our self not what we thought it was, but our real person is also not what we thought. We are Buddha nature as we are self nature. Our Buddha nature is our ultimate nature and can appear in any form to us, in other words, whatever works to help us in practice. And our self nature, born of ideas, flows freely with all circumstances when it is united with Buddha nature. We are born of Buddha nature, and our changes lead towards transformation of our whole being. To the extent that we don't resist that change, we can move in peace and harmony. We're like a baby swan when it hatches into an ungainly little bird and moves around in a fluff of feathers and often gets into one kind of trouble or another, yet it still grows up to finally look and act and sound like its parent swans. You could say that we begin as ungainly little Buddhas, looking unlike our parent Buddhas, and get ourselves into all kinds of trouble, arguing, resisting, and yet finally can come into full maturity as our parent Buddhas. If we don't trust ourselves that much, we can at least know that we'll mature and flower in the right time for each of us. We can rest assured that once planted in good soil, which is the practice, and receiving nutrition, sun, and water, which are the teachings, we will do what is natural and mature into full Buddhas, however long it takes. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Peter's coming over now. Flesh out the self here. Okay. You have any questions? Hopefully.
Here we are.
Okay, there we are.
I don't have any questions. You have any questions?
And Mike, thank God. Thank God for Mike.
Can you hear me? My voice is a little bit hoarse again today.
No, I can hear you well.
Okay. When you say you find a teacher to help you on the journey and stuff, can you be your own teacher? Or does it have to be a teacher outside yourself to help you understand what you're experiencing and what you're going through?
I think it helps to have the teacher outside yourself because you can get lost in your thinking and go around in circles and make much of the wrong thing and too little of the right thing. And all kinds of problems could happen. So the teacher outside yourself is a way of keeping a kind of balance. At a certain point, I think you don't need a teacher outside yourself, but I think for a long time you do.
And then eventually you just have to go on your journey with what you've learned and stuff. And just after you're done, after you've gone through all your teachers, you still get to a point where you still have to take your own steps on the path and go through what life presents. Kind of like in the ox herding pictures, where the last picture is the person's back in the town doing their usual life and going on, but they have the knowledge they have gained through their studies and with teachers and stuff like that.
Yes. So we may have many teachers in your lifetime, and though every one is actually you in another form, and it's you as you are presenting the world to yourself, and it's so that's I think why we have such accord with a teacher, because when we meet someone that's in real accord with our spirit, it's hearing ourselves speak and knowing the questions we would ask anyway, but just enough difference that it's harder. It's not easy. You have to really grow in that kind of relationship. You can't just lean on it. And so learning how to practice is learning to not rely on the practice at the same time as you're giving your all to the practice. But it's understanding that you still always have to take your own steps yourself. Yeah. So the last ox herding picture is coming back to the world with all of your knowledge, but like when you learn how to handwrite, you throw away all the learning and you just write. You don't even think of it. So it's like that. It's just throwing away all of that extra and just living with every moment as it is. So all you've learned to do really is to just be alive without the flowers, as it were, being willing.
You end up coming back to yourself again.
Yeah, but yes, coming back to yourself again, which one of our teachers in Japan said is a very, very hard thing to do. Because once we've broken from ourselves in a way, once we've let ourselves go, it's very hard to come back to what you think of as limitation, but it isn't. It's a totally new way of expressing all over again. So it's like a second chance in a way. You come back and you live your life as yourself without, extras.
So it's kind of like the idea of rivers are rivers, mountains are mountains, and they're not rivers and not mountains, but eventually they come back to being just mountains and rivers again. You're your life, you go out and learn and everything, and you end up coming back to being just who you were originally, but more aware and stuff.
Well, you have all the fleshing out of the knowledge in your bones, not just in your head. It's in your body and everything. So you come back and you just learn now what it's like to really just live with nothing special.
Thank you.
Yeah, not even expecting anything special anymore. It's learning that what you see is just it. That's it. You don't have to have any kind of interpretation of it anymore. It's just what it is. The mountain is just the mountain, nothing else. And, yeah. Anybody? Daniel.
You quoted Suzuki Roshi, "You're perfect, but you could use a little improvement."
Yeah.
That makes no sense and is a contradiction. Can you elaborate further on that?
Well, I thought that's what my whole talk was about, which is that we have this perfect nature, but yet we have this self nature, which is all messed up, and not because it was messed up, but because we messed it up. We added to it way more than should have been added to it, but we were just learning what choice meant. We were learning what navigation in the world meant. And we were like children playing with a doll or with an action figure or whatever. And we were having fun with it, so we kept dressing it up and dressing it up and dressing it up, and finally it's like way too much stuff on it. So we get back to the bare bones of this figure all over again and figure out and find what it's like to move with both our fullest nature, our complete nature, and with our colorful, diverse nature, which we use to express everything. So we learn all over again during practice what it means to express with that incomplete nature and express as fully as we can, navigating in the world, learning how to work in the world without special anything. So it's like taking off all the extra coats we've added and just playing with it as it is, as it were. Chris.
So once someone has whatever it is, gotten to the point that a teacher can help them get to, where they've taken off all the coats, as you say, um, and sort of just seen through the delusions, if that's a fair way to put it. So at that point, does the person no longer play dress up, so to speak, or do they just do so in a way that's, more like, uh, I don't know, self-aware?
I don't think it's a question of do or don't. I think it's more that when you feel natural, you behave naturally. And if you want to dress up the doll, dress it up. It doesn't matter whether you dress or don't dress it up. It's totally irrelevant. But what matters is that you don't get lost in it while you're involved with it. That you remember that you also have this other nature that is much bigger and sees the big picture of things rather than getting lost in a small version of a world. So it's like still admitting everything into your life through your big mind, but at the same time, having fun with yourself. It means you don't have to like be terribly serious or heavy about it. You can just enjoy living as yourself. I think a lot of us get lost in a very severe point of view about self, but self is actually can be a lot of fun. It's like it's your means of expression. And if you enjoy that expression, great. And if you have trouble with it because you think it's not perfect enough, then you spend all your time trying to be something that you aren't. So the best thing is to learn to live your life as yourself and yet understand there's a much bigger picture involved and that you involved by allowing everything to come through you and express itself. And that's your big mind. It's you everywhere, but it's, that way you color it and that way yourself continues to grow by just adapting to all those changes. And if yourself isn't rigid, then the adaptation is much easier and more enjoyable. So you don't try to hold yourself to a rigid standard. You allow it to expand or contract, whatever, the time calls for. Expand or contract rather than inflate or deflate. That's what it means. Yeah. Joel.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I've always loved the Oxfording pictures a whole lot. It occurred to me as you're talking about them, like the last one with this little guy is back in the marketplace, maybe contains within it a circular thing. I mean, the Oxfording pictures feel, well, first you're confused and then, you get enlightened or something like that. But I don't know, I have the feeling like people can, it's a circular thing, and like that's like Joshua Beck at one place says you can be at the ninth Oxfording pictures and something happens and all of a sudden you're at the second. And I mean, that seems implied in the guy in the marketplace, and the same thing, like Dogen says something about the life of a Zen teacher is one mistake after another. Does that make any sense? I mean,
Yes, it does. Actually, you do go back and forth in the ox herding pictures. You may think you're up riding the ox and everything is great, and then you do something totally unexpected and completely confused. And then you find yourself back trying to work through the other numbers again, say through the second where you just find it all over again, and you have to remember to believe in what you're doing. But I think at a certain point, you don't go back and forth as quite as much. At a certain point, you understand and you believe it totally, and so you stop trying to prove it to yourself all the time, and you spend your time instead trying to understand it, rather than trying to like prove that it exists or doesn't exist. Instead, you try to spend your time really understanding what, say, the seventh Oxfording picture means or the eighth Oxford. And at some point, you stop thinking about it altogether, and that's the one where the picture has no ox anymore. It's just nothing. It's just emptiness. But then there's the ox-herding pictures again, but they're not. You're not involved in thinking about them so much anymore. You can just put it aside. Just living is enough. You stop trying to say, well, what stage am I at now, and how much further do I have to? You just literally stop thinking altogether about any kind of practice, and you just start to enjoy your life as it is. And that doesn't mean you can't like mess up still and go back and have to bring yourself in place again, but you don't lose that basic understanding that, oh yes, this is indeed where we're doing this practice. We are moving along and understanding something very important about ourselves, opening up and letting everything in, the whole world in, and then we can practice, really, not just with our head. And
Yeah.
so when we start practicing really, we literally stop thinking so much about practice,
Yeah.
and we just start to live more. And I think the more that becomes strong, the more we just start living like in the last ox-herding picture. It's just living. It's not something special. It's just living. And
Yeah.
the living itself is enough.
Yeah, to be yourself is enough. Yeah, I mean, it's like you're in whatever ox-herding picture you are, but there's a sense like that this is part of a mask. You can be whatever. You notice that you're putting yourself down,
Yeah.
and at the same time that this is just the play of circumstance and the play of what is, and that that you know that there's this core which is there, and so and
What? I'm sorry, I missed that last sentence.
there's that core which is there,
Oh, okay.
and you do what's appropriate at the moment. Maybe apologize, maybe forget all about it, maybe, but
Yeah. But in that case, an apology is just an apology. You do what is just appropriate and natural. There's not a reason for it. You're not doing it to be good. You're not doing it to make the right move. You're not trying to be a good Buddhist. You're just naturally, the apology then would just be nothing more than apology. And
yeah,
that's enough.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, right. I can see that.
So if you spend time thinking about you're not good enough or something, then you're still back in the wandering stage.
Right.
So at some point, your mind will just quiet down more, and you'll just be content that life itself is enough. Making music is enough. Nothing, it doesn't have to be anything special anymore.
Right, right. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, good dinner, whatever it is, you feel satisfied with the moment as it is. Somebody gives you a hard time, that's fine. You just learn how to deal with it skillfully.
Right.
But it's nothing more than that.
Yes.
It's not because they feel this or they feel that for you, etc. You take yourself out of it totally and you just deal with it as it is. Oh, it's just this to be taken care of, this to be taken care of, dishes to be taken care of, whatever. No more important than that.
Right. I think that there's a confidence thing. uh, you know, that actually, I mean, it's a whole thing, a recent thing of mine, uh, that kind of like a kind of this lack of confidence and sort of lack of trust in what in fact is there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you're practiced, then you would just study lack of confidence. You wouldn't have to need anything further. That would be like a whole world of work right there. And that would also flower in your music, flower in your life, flower in your relationships. Just, it doesn't matter what the problem is. It will flower everywhere if you really look at it carefully without getting lost in it.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. Without getting, you investigate it thoroughly without being lost in it.
Without being lost in it.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Rachel.
All the little buttons to press. Thank you, Jane, very much. I was reminded of something, and I wondered if it did evoke the same teaching. I'm reminded of John Keats. He had a term called negative capability, which was the ability in the midst to be creative, if you like, but to live with a creativity or joy in seeking truth, but in the midst of mystery and uncertainty. And that's why I guess he called it negative capability. That's not very negative, but and when you were talking, especially in the middle picture segment, it just reminded me that the investigation would have that spirit of it, of that negative capability, even though you're not certain. Instead of it being fraught with anxiety, I mean, maybe pinches of anxiety here and there, pinches, but not in a pit of anxiety, you know, unable to get up out of the well of. Am I kind of on the right track with that?
No, it's interesting. What you're just saying. I think that's really what we're doing. Is I wouldn't call it negative either, because I think it's just highly creative, incredibly creative, because you're literally pulling things out of the hat. You know, the rabbit out of the hat with every decision you make, because you aren't relying on past, and you're not relying on quote practice even. You're just trying out your abilities to be flexible every moment and make good decisions and respond in an appropriate way to whatever is there in front of you. So you do make mistake after mistake until you get a feeling about what you're doing. So you might feel like you've got it all down and then make a terrible mistake afterwards and mess up everything. But it's still, that's the negative part of it, but it's still, because it's flexible and open, rebounds very quickly. It's not like when you fall down and you have to go through all the negative workings of your mind to get back up again. You just go down and you're back up instantly, because you don't have all these anchors on you, and you're willing to try, you're willing to make mistakes, you're willing to express yourself as fully as you possibly can, which means doing all kinds of new things, you know. And so that's for me what the creativeness of our response, appropriate response is that we don't have a template for how to behave. We only have the simplest one saying do no harm. You know, that leaves a great deal of and do good, you know, but that's it. And so we have all kinds of ways to figure that out, but finally you can't do it until you actually get in the field and do all these decisions and make all these mistakes and find what really, really works with people and what doesn't, and what makes you feel right and what makes you feel like, I don't know what I did wrong, but something wasn't right, you know, feeling. So there's no experience that we can fall back on and say, well, my teacher did it this way, so I'll do it that way, because it might not work even so. And the most wonderful person in the world you might try to repeat what they did and find that none of it works in your world. So it comes down to, I think what Keith said is very interesting. That is a very creative way to deal with the world. I think that's just what we do. Negative creativity, but I would say positive creativity.
Yes, he meant it with joy, even though he called it negative capability. But thank you, Jane.
Yeah, it's a good, I'll remember that phrase. It's a very good phrase. Matt.
You know, I apologize in advance if I fall asleep in the middle of my question.
Well, then can I leave?
Huh?
Never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. God, I don't know what to base my question on. Everything seems so linked at the moment in terms of the discussion and your talk. The language that, going back to Chris, the language that he used with regards to trying on different costumes, and your response to it, and I guess you were talking about how the self can be so much fun, and I'm going to take a guess that what you mean by self in that context is big self as opposed to small self, in which small self is not concerned with outcome, as you've been talking about in terms of leaping from the 100-foot pole and being willing to fail, except quote unquote fail. So that's part of the question is, am I getting the language right as far as big self and small self? And then the rest of the question has to go with, again, I'll continue with Chris's language as far as changing costumes. It doesn't sound so much like, from your responses, it doesn't sound so much like you're talking about really changing costumes, but just responding to things as they occur, and whether those things, how the quote unquote outside world and how mood and freshness within oneself are going to kind of dance together, I suppose. And in a sense, it seems like going to Rachel's language with regards to was it who was the poet? Rachel.
Keats.
Keats. It was Keats. Okay. Negate. The way that I understand that is not, the word negativity, but negation, as far as negation of, you negate to the point where you reach that point of letting things happen as they are, because you're not intending them. You're not weighing one thing against another. How am I going to respond? You're not reacting in terms of what your desires are as far as how you appear to others or how you appear to yourself. Am I getting the gist of all of this?
You are somewhat, but what I'm waiting for is to hear how you sum that up in a question.
Okay, well, my okay. Here's my question. Um, I guess because you're less, is it the self that is creative? Is this the self that is creative and the self that is responding to the needs of others? A, is this the same self, and B, is this what is referred to as big mind, big self, as opposed to small mind, small self?
First, I think that there's only one self, there's only one being. And we separate it somewhat to simplify so we can talk about a limited self that is the self that's always changing, and an ultimate self which is always present, always there. And it's also the creative self that allows all in everything that was created and is out here in our world, and allows it as part of our being, allows it to interact as we are, as one. And then we have another part of this self, which is still the same big self, but it's still a smaller part that navigates in the world and learns what is appropriate. It's sort of like the big self learning through the small self how to navigate, how to deal appropriately in every situation, how to make things work. So it's not really two selves, it's just one big being. And we get lost in the world of samsara because we get lost in being ourselves as we are in this world. But we don't have to be, we just have to remember this is not the whole of ourselves. It's only a small part that's looking at everything around us, the walls, the room, the people. But it's still one being, only one being. And we get lost in part of it. And so all we have to do is keep practicing. So we have one self that's quite complete, and we say this other self, but it's actually just the touch of reality. And we say this self is like a relative self because it's constantly changing to adapt to the circumstance of the world we're in. So it's the same self. It's just one is a more complete and it takes in everything, and the other is like a needle point reaching out and touching every little thing, as it were. I can't think of a better example, but I'm sure there is one. Peter, you can step in anytime.
I like the needle point. That was nice.
Yeah, it's like we're touching every little thing to see it in detail. Otherwise it would just be part of this whole being. And so we want to experience everything, every little thing. But we can get lost in it because at first we don't know what it is. We think that's it. Then we discover, actually, wait a minute, what is this other stuff I keep feeling? How come I keep changing? How come I keep feeling like a different person all the time? How can I be this way and that way, and then the next day be totally different? So all those questions put us in touch with this fuller, completer being. Are you asleep?
No. I'm taking it all in. Just my eye muscles are just drooping.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay.
Sandy's awake.
Sandy, how about you? You're welcome, Matt. Sandy.
I'm sort of awake.
Thank you.
Years ago, I read a book and there was a quote at the beginning of the book. I can't remember the author and I can't really remember the first line. There were only 2 lines to it. It was about going off on a journey to discover, what the world was about and who you were. But the second line was, but then you arrive back where you started and you know yourself for the first time. And I always thought that was a good description of Buddhism, of going off to study the self, of sitting in meditation. Um, and as you sit in meditation, things come up and you slowly change and you slowly have realizations. But in the end, we're back where we started. We're just there. But we have a more understanding of ourselves and can break away, like you say, from looking at the small self as one entity and the big self as another. We just are. And I've always remembered that one sentence, and your talk brought it back to me. So thank you. And I don't have a question, sorry.
Okay, well,
Anything else, anybody?
anybody? Any questions?
It's T.S. Eliot.
Oh, right. That's right. I knew it was a well-known author. Do you remember the first line?
We shall not cease for our exploration. Sorry, I can't remember it by heart.
Okay. I'll try to look it up then, now that I know it's T.S. Eliot. Thank you, Rachel.
Joel?
I love that Keats quote so much. And so I knew it was up there. And so I have it here. So if it's okay, I'll read exactly.
Do,
Several things dovetailed in my mind. And at once it struck me what quality went to form a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously. I mean, negative capability. That is, when man is capable of being in uncertainty, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Coleridge, for instance, would let go by a fine isolated verisimilitude, caught from the penultrium of mystery, from being incapable of remaining content with half knowledge. This pursued through volumes would perhaps take us no further than this, that with a great poet, the sense of beauty overcomes every other consideration, or rather obliterates all consideration. And I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I've always thought that captures, one lens onto so-called enlightenment. So-called enlightenment. I mean, like, we're surrounded by doubts and mysteries, and the state of being where there's no irritable searching for fact and reason, and you're just there with what is. Seems to me something that happens through maturing practice, if that makes any sense. But anyway, I thought I love that, so I figured I'd read it. So, thank you for putting up with that.
I like that irritable searching. I like that.
Yeah. No, that's very good. I like that too. It reminds me of what Trungpa said. Trungpa Rinpoche said when he was talking about all the doubts and the bad feelings and misery that we go through is really just compost for our real creativity, and that we shouldn't ever condemn ourselves for having such feelings, but understand that that's part of what nurtures us, for real opening up.
Right, and you're so right that it's all about creativity. This is what Shakespeare possessed so enormously. I think of it as capability to be with negative emotion or negative experience. So that's where the positive is. It's the capability.
Yes. Is welcoming. It's like the time I lost my temper in Tassajara, and I hadn't felt it for so long that I asked Suzuki Roshi, what should I do now? And he said, just say welcome back. That's what we say about all of our things. Welcome, all that good fertilizer, all that good stuff. say
Yeah.
welcome. It's what nurtures all your creativity. Yeah, that's true. Oh, Sandy?
Oh, sure. Hands up. She didn't put it down.
Oh, okay. Is that it? All done?
Yep. It's noontime. It's noontime. Yeah.
Okay, so it's noon.